Misty Copsey was born in 1978 to Diana Smith and Buck Copsey, who were in the process of separating at the time of her birth. Shortly afterward, her parents divorced and Misty grew up primarily under the care of her mother. For much of her childhood, Misty and Diana lived in a mobile home community called Green Meadows in Puyallup, Washington. Misty was popular among her peers, known for her outgoing and charismatic personality. She excelled academically and participated actively in sports such as softball, basketball, and volleyball. In 1992, Diana moved with Misty from their trailer park home to a duplex in nearby Spanaway, hoping to provide a more stable living environment. Although Spanaway was close to their former neighborhood on South Hill, the move introduced Misty to a new community where she initially had fewer friends. Diana often worked nights as a caregiver for an elderly woman, leaving Misty all alone at home. Despite this arrangement, their relationship remained positive. On September 17, 1992, Misty convinced her mother to allow her to attend the Puyallup Fair without any supervision. She planned to attend the fair with her friend Trina Brevard, but transportation posed an issue since Diana would be working overnight and could not provide a ride home. To secure permission from Trina's parents for the outing, Diana agreed to tell them she would drive both girls home after the fair, a lie intended to help Misty enjoy an evening out with friends. On that evening, Misty borrowed a pair of jeans from her mother, baggy stonewashed denim pants that were visibly oversized on her frame. She paired these jeans with a dark blue sweatshirt and brown suede shoes. Diana vividly remembered how small and fragile Misty appeared in those oversized clothes as she watched her daughter cross the street toward the fairgrounds. At around 8:40 p.m., after enjoying several hours at the fairgrounds with Trina, Misty realized that they had missed their scheduled bus back home. She used a payphone to call her mom at work, explaining their predicament. During this conversation, Misty mentioned that she might be able to get a ride home from an older acquaintance named Reuben Schmidt. Schmidt was an 18-year-old neighbor whom Misty had known since childhood when they both lived in the trailer park. However, Diana distrusted Schmidt due to his age difference and previous inappropriate behavior toward Misty. On one occasion, she overheard him make suggestive comments during a phone call with her daughter. Consequently, she explicitly instructed Misty not to accept a ride from Schmidt under any circumstances. After ending the call with her mother, Misty faced limited options for returning home safely. According to later accounts from Trina, the two girls separated after leaving the fairgrounds. Trina eventually secured transportation from her 23-year-old boyfriend, Michael Reiner. Misty reportedly declined joining them because she did not trust Reiner or feel comfortable accepting his offer of transportation. Left alone without transportation options or companions, Misty decided to walk the approximately 8-mile distance back home, a daunting journey for anyone late at night, but especially risky for an unaccompanied teenage girl unfamiliar with walking such distances alone after dark. Witness accounts placed Misty's last confirmed sighting between approximately 9:20 and 10 p.m. walking along Meridian Avenue near downtown Puyallup toward Highway 512's on-ramp area. A bus driver later reported seeing her around this time and informed her that bus service had concluded for the night, effectively stranding Misty without public transit options. Following the sighting near the entrance ramp area along Meridian Avenue, Misty vanished without further confirmed sightings or contact. The investigation into the disappearance was marred by delays, missteps, and a dismissive attitude from law enforcement that significantly hindered efforts to uncover the truth. Misty's mother reported her missing on September 18th after her daughter failed to return home from the fair the previous evening. Diana spent the day frantically searching for Misty, contacting friends and family, and leaving notes at Trina's house, hoping to find leads on her whereabouts. However, Diana quickly encountered obstacles with law enforcement due to jurisdictional confusion. Misty had disappeared in Puyallup, but Diana lived in Spanaway, which meant the Pierce County Sheriff's Department could not intervene without permission from the Puyallup Police Department. This delayed the filing of a formal missing person report. When Diana finally managed to file the report, she faced another setback. Police immediately classified Misty as a runaway rather than an endangered missing child. This decision was based on assumptions about Misty's behavior and Diana's credibility as a parent. Law enforcement officers scrutinized Diana's background, which included struggles with alcohol abuse and prior convictions for welfare fraud and DUI offenses. These factors led them to dismiss Diana's concerns and view Misty as a quote, throwaway girl, a term sometimes used in the early 1990s to describe teenagers presumed to have voluntarily left home for a life of partying or rebellion. The runaway theory gained traction after two of Misty's classmates falsely claimed that they had seen or spoken to her after her disappearance. One classmate alleged that Misty had called her and said she was safe, while another claimed to have seen her walking in town on September 21st. Both witnesses barely knew Misty, yet their statements were enough for police to close the case prematurely. They even went so far as to remove Misty from the National Crime Information Center database and informed the media that she had been found. A blatant falsehood. This decision effectively stalled any meaningful investigative efforts during the critical early days of her disappearance. For months, police refused to reconsider their initial assessment despite mounting evidence suggesting foul play. Diana persistently urged them to take her daughter's case seriously, but her pleas were largely ignored. It wasn't until December 1992, 3 months after Misty vanished, that investigators finally acknowledged she might have been abducted or harmed. By then, crucial leads had gone cold and potential evidence had likely been lost. When police eventually reopened the case, they interviewed two key individuals, Trina Brevard, Misty's best friend who had accompanied her to the fair, and Reuben Schmidt, an 18-year-old acquaintance who Misty had called for help on the night of her disappearance. Trina initially lied about how she returned home that evening, claiming she walked alone when she had actually received a ride from her 23-year-old boyfriend Michael Reiner. Trina stated that Reiner had offered Misty a ride as well, but that Misty declined due to mistrust. Investigators theorized that Reiner might have returned to the fairgrounds after dropping Trina off and convinced Misty to get into his car. However, Reiner denied any involvement in the disappearance and passed a polygraph test, leading police to eliminate him as a suspect. Schmidt's account raised more questions than answers. He claimed he couldn't pick up Misty because he didn't have enough gas, but later admitted he suffered from chronic blackouts and couldn't remember his actions after speaking with her on the phone. Schmidt told investigators he woke up at his grandmother's farm near Enumclaw the morning after Misty's disappearance, but couldn't explain how he got there. His roommate contradicted Schmidt's story, stating he left their apartment shortly after speaking with Misty and didn't return until the next day. When asked if it was possible he had harmed Misty during one of his blackouts, Schmidt replied that he didn't know. By late 1992, law enforcement efforts slowed considerably as detectives struggled to piece together what happened after Misty's final phone call with Schmidt. The lack of physical evidence or eyewitness accounts left them with few leads to follow. Then an unexpected figure entered the investigation. Corey Bober, a local amateur investigator obsessed with unsolved murders in Washington state, particularly those linked to serial killers like Gary Ridgway, aka the Green River Killer. Corey believed Misty's disappearance was connected to two earlier murders in the same area, Kimberly DeLange in 1988 and Anna Chebetnoy in 1990. Both teenagers vanished from the Hi-Ho shopping center area before their bodies were discovered in dense brush off Highway 410 in 1991. Corey urged Diana Smith to pressure police into intensifying their search for Misty and suggested organizing private search parties near the same area where the other two women were found buried less than 100 feet apart. On February 7, 1993, nearly 5 months after Misty's disappearance, a private search led by Corey uncovered several items belonging to Misty near Highway 410 and Waco Road close to Mud Mountain Dam: jeans, underwear, one sock, a hairpick, and a toothbrush. The clothing appeared weathered from prolonged exposure but showed no signs of blood or bodily fluids. Forensic analysis revealed 3 red paint chips on her jeans, which were later lost by investigators, and DNA from an unidentified male. Despite these discoveries providing potential evidence of foul play, police remained skeptical of Corey's involvement due to his eccentric behavior and strained relationship with local authorities. Investigators briefly considered him a suspect, but ultimately ruled him out due to his partial alibi for the night of Misty's disappearance. Throughout this period, Diana Smith expressed frustration with law enforcement's handling of her daughter's case. She criticized their refusal to investigate Schmidt thoroughly despite his suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements. In recent times, renewed efforts by the local police department have sought public assistance through social media campaigns aimed at generating new leads in this cold case. However, decades of mishandling by investigators have left many unanswered questions about what truly happened to Misty Copsey. Carl Landers, a 69-year-old experienced hiker from Orinda, California, vanished under mysterious circumstances on Mount Shasta on May 22, 1999. Despite extensive search efforts, no trace of him has ever been found. He was well known for his physical fitness and passion for hiking and climbing, which he pursued with vigor despite his advancing age. He was a member of the Orinda Roadrunners, a local running club for older adults focused on staying active. Through this group, Carl formed close friendships with Milton Milt Gaines, 64, and Barry Gilmore, 60, who would accompany him on his ill-fated climb. Carl's hiking ambitions were fueled by a personal goal to summit the highest peak in every county in California. Mount Shasta, standing at over 14,000 feet in the Cascade Range, was one of the peaks he sought to conquer. This was not his first attempt at climbing Mount Shasta. He had previously tried but failed due to adverse conditions. That failed attempt haunted him, as Carl was known for his stubborn determination and dislike of failure. His resolve to succeed on this second attempt was evident in the meticulous planning for the trip. The climb began on Friday, May 21st, 1999. Carl and his companions planned to ascend the mountain over 2 days, starting from Bunny Flat Trailhead early in the morning and camping overnight at an area known as the 50-50 Plateau, located roughly halfway up the mountain. Their goal was to summit the peak on Saturday morning and descend by evening. Carl intended to call his wife from the town of Mount Shasta that night before embarking on additional solo hikes in the area, including Mount Eddy. His wife, Bobby Landers, had expressed concerns about him hiking alone after his companions returned home Saturday evening, but Carl reassured her that he would be fine. The trio set out early Friday morning from their motel, equipped for a challenging ascent through deep snow. Carl's pace was notably slower than that of Milt and Barry due to health issues that emerged during the hike. He began experiencing diarrhea and discomfort, likely exacerbated by altitude sickness or side effects from Diamox, a medication he was taking to help adjust to higher altitudes. Despite these challenges, he refused to quit or turn back. His companions tried walking behind him at times so as not to get too far ahead, but eventually took the lead at his insistence. By late afternoon, they reached Horse Camp but decided to push onward to 50-50 Plateau despite worsening weather conditions. Winds were at speeds estimated around 50 miles per hour as they ascended further into the mountain's exposed terrain. While setting up camp at 50-50 Plateau around 8 p.m., another hiker approached Milt and Barry asking if they knew Carl Landers. The hiker reported seeing Carl struggling down the mountain and suggested he might need assistance. Concerned for their friend's well-being, Milt and Barry descended approximately 200 yards to find Carl slowly making his way uphill. They helped him by carrying his pack and eventually brought him back to camp. At camp that evening, Milt and Barry worked together to dig out an igloo-style shelter for their tent while Carl assisted despite appearing increasingly unwell. He did not complain openly about feeling poorly but was visibly affected by his condition. When it came time for dinner, Carl stubbornly refused to eat despite encouragement from his friends. He also drank very little water despite needing hydration after several bouts of diarrhea throughout the day. This refusal to eat or drink concerned his friends but did not deter their plans to continue climbing the next day. The group decided to rest for the night before resuming their journey early Saturday morning. Although Carl seemed to sleep relatively well, getting up only once during the night to use the bathroom, his companions noted that he appeared unusually quiet when they woke up around 5:50 a.m. on May 22nd. Breakfast consisted of hot chocolate and half a bagel, which Carl managed to consume despite his weakened state. As they prepared for their journey toward Lake Helen, a higher campsite approximately 900 feet above their current location, Carl insisted on leaving camp ahead of the others so he could get a head start due to his slower pace. This decision marked the last confirmed sighting of Carl Landers. His determination and stubbornness were defining traits that shaped both his personality and approach to outdoor challenges. His friends described him as someone who could become argumentative when frustrated but would quickly regain composure. These characteristics likely contributed to his insistence on continuing despite clear signs of physical distress during this climb. After approximately an hour or two of hiking separately from Carl, Milt followed his trail toward Lake Helen but encountered a puzzling situation along the way. He saw another climber moving swiftly up the trail but quickly realized it was not Carl. Upon reaching Lake Helen, a common stopping point for climbers attempting Mount Shasta's summit, Milt found no sign of Carl anywhere in the area. Barry joined Milt at Lake Helen shortly afterward. Neither man could locate their friend despite searching nearby trails and speaking with other climbers in the area. One ranger stationed at Lake Helen reported seeing someone matching Carl's description earlier that morning but could not confirm whether it was him or another climber. Concerned about Carl's absence and lack of communication with anyone on the trail, Milt decided to descend back toward Bunny Flat later that evening to report him missing. He left behind some supplies at 50-50 Plateau in case Carl returned there after becoming disoriented or lost. On Sunday morning, May 23rd, search and rescue operations were initiated by Siskiyou County Sheriff's Department with assistance from U.S. Forest Service Rangers and volunteers equipped with skis and snowshoes. Helicopters provided by California National Guard and California Highway Patrol were deployed to scan Mount Shasta's slopes using infrared sensors capable of detecting heat signatures. Ground teams conducted grid searches across key areas where Carl might have traveled or fallen off course, including Cascade Gulch near Lake Helen, and extended their efforts into Sand Flat and McBride Springs further down the mountain slopes. Despite extensive search efforts, no trace of Carl's body, clothing, or equipment was ever found, leaving only theories to explain what might have happened. These theories range from natural causes and environmental factors to more speculative ideas involving foul play or even paranormal phenomena. One of the most plausible theories is that he succumbed to natural causes, such as a medical emergency or exposure to the elements. Carl was not in peak physical condition during the climb. He had been experiencing negative symptoms consistent with altitude sickness, which can include dizziness, nausea, confusion, and fatigue. He was also taking Diamox, a medication designed to help with altitude adjustment, but its side effects, such as dehydration and gastrointestinal distress, might have exacerbated his condition rather than alleviated it. Given his physical state, it is possible that Carl suffered a medical emergency, such as a heart attack or stroke, while hiking alone toward Lake Helen. His companions reported that he had refused food and water the previous evening, which could have further weakened him. If he collapsed due to a medical issue, he might have succumbed to hypothermia quickly in the cold conditions at high altitude. However, this theory does not explain why no evidence of his body or belongings was ever found during the extensive search efforts. Another plausible explanation is that Carl fell while traversing the rugged terrain. The area between 50-50 Plateau and Lake Helen is not particularly steep or hazardous compared to other parts of the mountain, but it does feature snow-covered slopes and loose volcanic rock. A misstep could have caused Carl to fall into a concealed crevasse or other natural feature where his body would be difficult to locate. However, Mount Shasta's Avalanche Gulch route, where Carl disappeared, is relatively well traveled and lacks major holes or cliffs where someone could vanish entirely. The absence of any visible signs of a fall, such as disturbed snow or scattered belongings, complicates this theory. Additionally, search and rescue teams thoroughly examined the area with helicopters, infrared sensors, and ground crews, but found no evidence of an accident. The mountain's unpredictable weather may have also played a role in the disappearance. The mountain is known for sudden changes in conditions, including high winds and snowstorms. On the night before Carl vanished, winds reportedly reached speeds of up to 50 to 70 miles per hour. Such conditions could have disoriented him or obscured his tracks in the snow. If Carl became disoriented due to weather conditions or altitude sickness, he might have wandered off the established trail into less accessible areas. This could explain why no footprints were found leading away from the main path. However, search teams expanded their efforts far beyond this area without finding any sign of him. While obviously more fantastical, Mount Shasta has long been associated with myths and legends involving paranormal phenomena. Some locals believe the mountain is home to an energy vortex or portal to another dimension. Others claim it is a hotspot for UFO activity. Numerous reports describe unidentified flying objects entering or exiting the mountain through its rocky slopes. These stories have fueled speculation that Carl may have encountered something supernatural during his hike. Such theories capture the imagination, but they lack credible evidence and are generally dismissed by experts as folklore rather than fact. Nevertheless, the location's reputation as a paranormal hotspot continues to draw attention from those who view Carl's disappearance as more than just a tragic accident. The disappearance of Jane, Arna, and Grant Beaumont, aged 9, 7, and 4 respectively, from Glenelg Beach near Adelaide, South Australia on January 26, 1966 remains one of Australia's most notorious unsolved mysteries. The siblings vanished during a routine beach outing, sparking an extensive investigation. On Wednesday, January 26, 1966, Australia Day, the city of Adelaide, South Australia, experienced scorching heat, with temperatures reaching approximately 40 degrees Celsius. The Beaumont family lived at 109 Harding Street in Somerton Park, a quiet suburb near Glenelg Beach. The family consisted of parents Grant, often referred to as Jim, and Nancy Beaumont, who had married in December 1955, and their 3 previously mentioned children. The children often visited nearby the beach, located approximately 3 kilometers from their home. It was not unusual at the time for children to travel independently to local recreational areas. On January 25th, the day before their disappearance, their father, Jim, had dropped them off at Glenelg Beach before departing on a 3-day business trip to Snowtown. On the morning of January 26th, the heat wave continued. The children asked their mother, Nancy, if they could return to the beach. Due to the extreme heat making walking uncomfortable, Nancy permitted them to take a short bus ride instead. At approximately 8:45 a.m., Nancy watched from the front gate as her 3 children boarded a public bus on Harding Street for the 5-minute journey to Glenelg Beach. Witnesses later confirmed seeing the children boarding the bus around this time. A female passenger distinctly remembered Jane holding her book and noted the children's clothing colors clearly enough to provide credible testimony. At approximately 10:10 a.m., multiple witnesses, including the bus driver, saw the siblings arriving at their destination. The next hour remains less clear. However, local postman Tom Patterson initially reported seeing the children walking along Jetty Road toward the beach during this period. Patterson knew them personally and initially claimed he saw them around mid-morning, but later expressed uncertainty about his exact timing. Between late morning and early afternoon, several credible sightings placed the children at or near Glenelg Beach. Witnesses observed them playing comfortably with an unidentified man at Collie Reserve adjacent to the beach area. This man was described consistently as approximately 6 feet, slim or athletic build, aged in his mid-30s with fair to light brown hair and a sun-tanned complexion. Witnesses noted that the children appeared relaxed and comfortable around him, behavior considered unusual by their parents since Jane was typically reserved around strangers. One significant witness interaction occurred when this unidentified man approached bystanders claiming money belonging to the children had gone missing from their belongings while they swam. He then left briefly to change clothes while instructing the children to wait for him. Later sightings indicated that around noon or shortly thereafter, witnesses saw this man leaving Collie Reserve accompanied by all 3 children. Another crucial sighting occurred at Wenzel's Bakery on Mosley Street near the beach. A shopkeeper familiar with the Beaumont siblings reported that Jane purchased pasties and a meat pie using a £1 note, an unusual detail since Nancy had only provided 6 shillings and 6 pence for bus fares and lunch expenses. Additionally, Jane had never previously bought a meat pie during visits there. Police later considered this evidence strongly indicative that someone else provided money to Jane. Initially expected home on either the noon or 2 p.m. bus, Nancy became increasingly concerned when her children failed to arrive as scheduled. By mid-afternoon, around 3:00 p.m., Jim returned home early from his trip due to growing concerns communicated by Nancy over telephone calls earlier that day. Upon returning home and learning his children were missing for several hours already without contact or sightings reported by neighbors or friends nearby, Jim immediately drove directly toward crowded Glenelg Beach, seeking any sign of them, but found nothing. From around 3 to 5 p.m., Jim and Nancy frantically searched streets surrounding their home neighborhood as well as friends' residences, hoping perhaps their children had stopped elsewhere unexpectedly after leaving beach areas earlier that day. When these searches yielded no results whatsoever and anxiety escalated further, they officially reported their children's disappearance to the police around approximately 5:30 p.m. Police initially assumed perhaps accidental circumstances such as drowning or becoming lost might explain why 3 young siblings remained missing beyond expected return times from local beaches frequented regularly without incident previously. However, as evening progressed without discovery, despite extensive preliminary searches, fears quickly intensified toward possible abduction scenarios involving foul play. The disappearance has led to numerous suspects being investigated over the decades. While none of these individuals have been conclusively linked to the case, their backgrounds and connections to the events of that day have kept them under scrutiny. The first suspect in the list is named Bevan Spencer von Einem, a convicted murderer serving life imprisonment for the 1984 killing of Richard Kelvin, has long been considered a suspect in the Beaumont case. Bevan was implicated in multiple murders of young boys and was believed to have accomplices. His connection to the case emerged when an informant, known only as Mr. B, alleged that Bevan had confessed to abducting 3 children from a beach years earlier. According to Mr. B, Bevan claimed he had taken the children home to perform experiments on them. He allegedly boasted about conducting brilliant surgery on each child and stated that one of them had died during the procedure. Fearing exposure, he reportedly killed the other 2 and disposed of their bodies in bushland south of Adelaide. Bevan matched descriptions of the man seen with the Beaumont children at the beach, but no concrete evidence has ever linked him to their disappearance. Another suspect was named Derek Percy, one of Australia's most notorious child killers. He was convicted for the 1969 murder of Yvonne Tuohy in Victoria. Percy was suspected in several other unsolved child murders across Australia due to his history of violent behavior and his presence in areas where such crimes occurred. Percy reportedly told investigators that he could not remember whether he had killed the Beaumont children, but admitted he was in South Australia around the time of their disappearance. However, Percy was only 17 years old in 1966, which made him younger than witnesses' descriptions of the man seen with the children. Additionally, there was no evidence that Percy had access to a vehicle at the time, which would have been necessary for transporting and disposing of 3 children. Despite these inconsistencies, some investigators continue to consider him a potential suspect. The third suspect was named James Ryan O'Neill. He was another convicted child murderer who has been linked to the Beaumont case. In 1975, O'Neill was sentenced to life imprisonment for murdering a 9-year-old boy in Tasmania. Over time, he reportedly told acquaintances that he was responsible for abducting the Beaumont children. In an interview with former detective Gordon Davey for an ABC documentary titled The Fisherman, O'Neill made ambiguous statements about his involvement. When asked directly if he murdered the Beaumont children, he replied, "On legal advice, I am not going to say where I was or when I was there." Although O'Neill denied ever visiting Adelaide, his work in the opal industry required frequent travel through Coober Pedy, which would have necessitated passing through Adelaide. Despite these claims, South Australian police interviewed O'Neill and ultimately discounted him as a suspect due to lack of evidence. Harry Phipps, a wealthy Adelaide businessman who lived just 300 meters from Glenelg Beach, became a key suspect after allegations surfaced posthumously about his abusive behavior and possible involvement in child exploitation. Harry bore a strong resemblance to witness descriptions of the man seen with the children and was known for frequently giving out £1 notes, the same denomination Jane used at Wenzel's Bakery on the day they disappeared. Harry's estranged son Hayden later claimed that he saw Jane, Arna, and Grant in his father's yard on January 26, 1966. 2 men also came forward decades later stating that Harry had paid them as teenagers to dig a large hole at his factory site shortly after the disappearance. While many suspects have emerged over nearly 6 decades since the Beaumont children's disappearance, none have been definitively proven guilty or charged with involvement in this tragic case. Each suspect brought unique circumstances or allegations that aligned partially with witness accounts or investigative theories but lacked conclusive evidence necessary for resolution. On April 3, 1943, Lansing, Illinois became the scene of a brutal murder that has remained unsolved for decades, that being the murder of 14-year-old Gloria Sullivan. Gloria's life began under deeply challenging circumstances marked by abandonment, tragedy, and instability. Born in 1929, she was the second of 3 children in her family. Her father, Clarence Sullivan, deserted his wife Viola and their children in 1933 when Gloria was just 4 years old. This act left Viola unable to provide for her children, forcing the family into dire financial straits. The situation quickly worsened when Viola passed away shortly afterward, leaving Gloria and her siblings orphaned. Following their mother's death, Gloria and her older sister Theodora were placed in a juvenile detention home due to the lack of other viable options for their care. This institutionalization was a grim chapter in their young lives, exposing them to the harsh realities of a system designed more for containment than nurturing. While Theodora eventually found a new home with a family in Chicago, Gloria's fate took a different turn. In 1935, she became the foster daughter of Patrick Brady and his wife in Lansing, Illinois. The Bradys provided Gloria with the stability and kindness she desperately needed after such a tumultuous start to life. They were described as loving and attentive caregivers who treated Gloria as their own child. Although they wished to formally adopt her, legal obstacles prevented them from doing so. Clarence Sullivan had vanished completely following his abandonment of the family, making it impossible to secure his consent for adoption. Despite this bureaucratic hurdle, the Bradys embraced Gloria fully as part of their family. Under their care, Gloria flourished emotionally and socially. She adjusted well to her new environment and began to thrive academically. Her teachers and neighbors described her as intelligent, mature beyond her years, responsible, and well-adjusted despite the hardships she had endured early on. The stability provided by the Brady household seemed to offer Gloria a chance at a brighter future. Tragedy struck again in 1941 when Mrs. Brady succumbed to cancer. At just 12 years old, Gloria faced yet another upheaval in her life. However, she responded with remarkable resilience, assuming many of the household responsibilities left behind by Mrs. Brady's passing. She effectively became the lady of the house, managing chores while continuing her education and taking on babysitting jobs in the community. Despite these additional burdens, Gloria maintained her academic success and social connections. She was well liked by peers and adults alike for her maturity and reliability. Her ability to juggle schoolwork with household duties demonstrated an extraordinary level of responsibility for someone so young. By all accounts, she had overcome the difficulties of her early childhood and was on track for a promising future. Theodora Sullivan, Gloria's older sister, who had been adopted by a family in Chicago years earlier, remained largely disconnected from Gloria's life during this period. By 1943, Theodora was working as a telephone operator in Chicago, but had not spoken to Gloria for 8 months prior to her murder. Fast forward to April 3rd, 1943, the day began as an ordinary Saturday morning for Gloria. At approximately 8 a.m., her foster father Patrick left for his job at the Inland Steel Company. Before departing, he gave Gloria money to shop for Easter clothes, a task she planned to complete with her friend Dorothy Waydig later that morning. Gloria was described as cheerful and composed during these early hours, showing no signs of distress or concern. Around 9 a.m., Gloria called Dorothy to confirm their plans for the shopping trip. Dorothy agreed to meet her at the Brady residence before heading to Hammond, Indiana. This phone call marked the beginning of what should have been a simple outing between two friends. Shortly after this conversation, a laundry delivery driver arrived at the Brady home and dropped off clothes. The driver later reported nothing unusual about the interaction with Gloria. At approximately 9:30 a.m., Viola Tobin, a neighbor of the Bradys, visited the house to retrieve a vacuum cleaner that Gloria had borrowed earlier. Tobin later recalled that Gloria appeared entirely normal during their brief interaction. She showed no signs of distress or fear and seemed ready to continue her day as planned. Tobin left shortly afterward with her vacuum cleaner, unknowingly becoming the last person, aside from her killer, to see Gloria alive. Within less than an hour of her departure, something tragic occurred inside the Brady home. While the exact time of the attack remains uncertain, investigators believe it happened sometime between 9:30 a.m. and 10:20 a.m. At approximately 10:20 a.m., Dorothy arrived at the Brady residence as planned. However, upon reaching the house, she found the front door locked from the inside. She knocked repeatedly but received no response from within. She attempted to peer through the windows but found them tightly covered by curtains, preventing her from seeing inside. Dorothy waited outside for about 5 minutes before deciding to leave. She caught the 10:30 a.m. bus to Hammond alone and continued with her shopping trip without Gloria. Later testimony from Dorothy revealed an an important detail. She did not hear any radio playing during her time outside the house, a fact that would later contrast sharply with Patrick Brady's account upon his return home that evening. After Dorothy's departure, no further activity was reported at the residence until Patrick returned home from work at approximately 5:15 p.m. When Patrick arrived home, he immediately noticed something unusual. Loud music was playing from inside the house. This detail stood out because Dorothy had explicitly stated there was no radio noise when she visited earlier in the day. The discrepancy suggested that someone, likely Gloria's killer, had turned on the radio after Dorothy left. Patrick entered through an unlocked front door and made his way into the kitchen, where he discovered a horrifying scene. Gloria lay dead on the floor, her body ravaged by multiple stab wounds. She had been stabbed 20 times in her chest, back, and throat with knives taken directly from their kitchen. Defensive wounds on her arms indicated she had fought desperately against her attacker. The brutality of the crime shocked investigators and residents alike. Despite extensive efforts to reconstruct Gloria's final hours and identify her killer, many aspects of this timeline remain shrouded in mystery. The initial investigation revealed several puzzling clues at the crime scene. Despite the ferocity of the attack, there were no signs of sexual assault or robbery. Gloria was fully dressed and nothing appeared to be missing from the house. A sum of $200 in cash remained untouched in a kitchen cabinet, which further ruled out theft as a motive. The house itself was in its usual state of order, with no signs of forced entry or disruption beyond what occurred during the struggle. In the bathroom adjacent to the kitchen, investigators discovered critical forensic evidence that suggested additional activity by the killer after the murder. A bloody palm print was found on the wash basin along with a bloody fingerprint on the wall. Nearby was a stack of bloody towels, indicating that the perpetrator had taken time to clean themselves before leaving. This detail suggested that the killer was concerned about their appearance and wanted to avoid drawing attention while fleeing. One of the most intriguing discoveries was Gloria's hairbrush in the bathroom. The brush contained strands of long blonde hair, distinctly different from Gloria's brunette hair or Patrick's gray hair. This clue raised speculation that another individual, possibly female, had been present in the house around the time of her murder. However, it also led to conflicting interpretations. Some theorized that these hairs might have belonged to one of Gloria's friends who had visited previously and casually used her brush, which would not be unusual. The killer's actions at the crime scene added layers of complexity to an already baffling case. The decision to clean up using towels and leave behind bloody fingerprints and palm prints suggested either carelessness or haste in escaping after committing such a violent act. Additionally, turning up the radio volume could indicate an attempt to obscure sounds during or after the attack, or simply create confusion about timing. The lack of any clear motive further complicated efforts to understand what drove someone to commit such an act against a seemingly well-adjusted and innocent young girl. Investigators were left grappling with questions about whether this crime was premeditated or impulsive and whether it involved personal animosity or random violence. One of the earliest theories involved Clarence Sullivan, Gloria's biological father, who had abandoned his family in 1933 when she was just 4 years old. Despite his long absence from Gloria's life, vague reports suggested that he might have been seen in Lansing around the time of the murder. Police considered whether Clarence could have returned after 10 years for reasons unknown and committed this heinous act against his daughter. However, this theory raised more questions than it answered. Why would Clarence suddenly reappear after so long? What motive could he possibly have for murdering his own child? Efforts to locate him proved fruitless. Clarence had effectively vanished without a trace and was declared legally dead in 1950. Another lead emerged from entries in Gloria's diary mentioning an unnamed male acquaintance who had recently, quote, tried to flirt with her. Investigators identified this individual and questioned him thoroughly about his interactions with the victim. However, he was ultimately cleared as a suspect due to lack of evidence linking him to the crime. This lead added an element of intrigue to the case but did little to advance it. While it suggested that someone might have taken an inappropriate interest in Gloria, there was no indication that this person harbored violent intentions or had any connection to her murder. Over time, other theories about potential suspects emerged but remained speculative due to lack of evidence. One possibility involved an unknown magazine salesman rumored locally at the time. Some speculated that this individual might have entered homes under false pretenses and targeted Gloria for reasons unknown. However, investigators found no concrete evidence supporting this theory. Gloria's older sister, Theodora, also struggled to come to terms with her sister's death. When questioned by police during the investigation, she was unable to provide any useful information about potential suspects or motives for the crime. She had no knowledge of their father Clarence's whereabouts or whether he might have been involved in the murder. The estrangement between Theodora and Gloria added another layer of tragedy to the case. Not only did Theodora lose her sister under horrific circumstances, but she also carried the burden of not having been closer to her during her final years. As for Gloria's father Patrick, his health began to deteriorate under the weight of his sorrow. 4 years after Gloria's murder in 1947, he passed away from a heart attack at the age of 59. Many who knew him believed that his grief over Gloria's death contributed significantly to his early demise. In the years following his daughter's death, Patrick became consumed by grief and a relentless desire for justice. He frequently visited the police station, hoping for any new developments in the investigation. Despite his persistence, no significant leads ever emerged to solve the case.